Like, even if you're talking about, like, Britain and the way that it wasn't entirely understood who was going to get what. Like Britain just fucked this world up in many respects. Like, don't get me wrong, I follow the country, I like the country, but when their empire fell apart, it fell apart. And so you ended up with the Kashmir issue. You ended up with, what's the other one? No, there's another one that's a big one. Hong Kong. You ended up with the Hong Kong issue, where Britain strips Hong Kong away in order to punish China for not letting them sell drugs. Like, think about that shit. Like the Opium Wars. Because at various points in Chinese history, they were trying to throw off Western influence.
Yeah.
And, this big push over and over and over again. Even China's role in World War II. Oftentimes, that's not even talked about. But China, the communists and the other one, the communists and the social democrats came together in order to fight off, the communists and the governmental forces came together to fight off the Japanese. Because the communists had their own group and their own militant wing at that point, and they were at odds and they were fighting. But I guess my point is, that stuff usually doesn't get talked about. They have a deep, let's call it insecurity, associated with Hong Kong. Like, any person would have a deep insecurity about it if something happened to them and they needed to kind of respond in kind. And they couldn't respond, meaning they couldn't protect or defend Hong Kong. And so now you have this thing that doesn't want to be you, even though it's you. It's like, this kind of organist rejecting of sorts. And from the standpoint of them, they look at it as, that's our territory, that's our country. You guys ripped this away, not to mention the way it was ripped away, and for the reasons it was ripped away, and the fact that they don't want to be part of it makes it that much worse. In 40 years, Hong Kong is supposed to go back to China, and this one country, two systems thing is supposed to break down. Don't look like that's going to happen, dog. What did I tell you? I think I've said it more than one occasion. Anytime you have a protest, where you have a large body of people who get together and they're doing their thing and they start to feel themselves and they're like, oh, fuck, man, juices are fucking flowing. We took down that airport. Like, I'm telling you, I shit you not. When you look back through history and you look at, like, the Russian Revolution, even Spain, even France, what's taking place there, they're still having those protests. The Yellow Vest movement. It starts off as something small, but it escalates. In Hong Kong situation, it made 0 sense. This protest made 0 sense if it wasn't going to, we want democracy and to be let off. I mean, because what? It's like, yeah, we don't want that law that allows us to be pushed over across seas. Okay, in 40 years, you're going to belong to China. So what? You don't want that law. It doesn't fully make sense unless it goes there. The catch here is that it's not going there by itself. And I want to talk about the Hong Kong thing. Let's transition to Hong Kong.
Okay.
So, this guy, this is Jimmy Lai. Jimmy Lai is a plutocrat. Jimmy Lai lives in Hong Kong. Jimmy Lai is supporting the pro-democracy protesters. He's been funding them. Jimmy Lai has contacts with Pompeo, John Bolton, Trump administration, those Americans. And he was in the United States almost like a month or so ago. So, I did a video saying that when these guys were holding up the American flag, that they weren't holding it up for no reason.
Yeah.
That the reason, I was like, there's no way they're holding this flag up for no reason. They're either doing this to want support or they're doing this to send a message. Now, China comes out and says the black hand. Well, they're talking about us. They're saying that Western powers are involving themselves in Hong Kong in their affairs because they want to undermine China. And I've kind of made this point that there are two reasons. Either strip Hong Kong away, in which case just deeply problematic and embarrassing, or provoke a reaction. Just like with Russia. Like when the United States was involved in Afghanistan, that provoked a reaction from the Soviet Union that Russia overcommitted itself in regards to the affairs of Afghanistan, creating their own type of Vietnam. It's not so much that the Hong Kong thing will create a quote-unquote Vietnam, but the world will flip. If China dropped military into Hong Kong, the world would flip the fuck out. They wouldn't do anything because China is a nuclear power nation. They kick ass. but they will, oh my God, look at them, look at them, look at them. This notion of trying to paint China and Russia as the boogeyman bad guys that we gotta be, this existential threat. And then every time a politician talks, he's like, and China invaded Hong Kong, those bastards. Well, in the same way they do with Russia, when Russia invaded the Crimea. Do you realize Joe Biden said that? Joe Biden, he couldn't remember Obama's name, but he could remember the term Crimea. He probably practiced that really heavily. The Crimea voted to go with Russia. Do you know why they voted to go with Russia? Because the United States have been supporting a bunch of Nazis in regards to paramilitary forces within the Ukraine when the Ukrainian government collapsed. That's why. That's never said. That's never said. The only part that's said is, fucking Russians took the Crimea. They don't say the other part. Like, it's always aggravating to me when I talk about American news. Because, just like the Indian news, where they were like, nothing to see here, folks. Nothing to see here, folks. America, we do it a little bit differently. We just say, yeah, when those Russians took the Crimea. And just let that shit ride. Everybody knows what you're talking about. Nobody's going to push back at that. Nobody's going to say, wait. Didn't they vote to go to Russia? I mean, it wasn't the Ukrainian collapsing. I mean, come on. I mean, this doesn't seem fair. Your implication here is that these guys were running roughshod over, that never took place. I get aggravated by that because it's unfair in regards to coverage. And, I don't necessarily know if peace is possible per se, but I do know it's not possible by being dishonest when you're interacting in affairs that way. I mean, granted, you could say, well, they're going to lie to us, so we should lie to them. But that's, again, somewhat of a circular reasoning. You kind of have to start from somewhere. It's fucking aggravating. So, hey. Hong Kong, this guy, Jimmy Lai, is the connection. That's the connection. Now, there's an American diplomat that was outed by China. I've shown that picture on more than one occasion. I would have to find it. But that's one American contact. Lai is another, since Lai has essentially access to our political system, meaning Bolton, Pompeo, Trump, et cetera, et cetera. He's the in-betweener. Meaning, when these guys are flying the American flag, they're not doing it for no reason. This is him out in these protests. They're doing it to send a message. A, that they are involved in the process, which is kind of a thumb in the eye. But beyond that, the thumb in the eye thing, it's pressure from the standpoint of negotiations. At this point, the United States considers China an economic threat. They're trying to take out Crown. They're trying to go further than what they are supposed to be able to go. Their technology is far more advanced than what we want to give them credit. Now, you can see right off the bat why this is problematic. China is 3 times our population and is larger than our landmass. If China develops economically just naturally, by definition, they would catch us just because, it's a massive, massive country. However, the U.S. has taken the position of, we need to stop them. We need to curb their influence. Mm-hmm. And it's how do you do that without coming into conflict with a country who you are trying to curb their influence? Because if we're being honest, you have no right to curb their influence any more than they have, it's like you have no moral right to do this. This is just power play. Yeah. In which case they have every right, as much as you do, to not allow themselves to be curbed. I hope you understand what I mean. Like, this is not a right and wrong issue. This is not, China is morally wrong for expanding. That's nonsense. Nor is it, China is stealing our property. Britain used to say the same thing about the United States. Britain and France. They used to say, they're stealing our intellectual property, those bastards. Now we're saying it about China. All right, fair enough. My point is, this is not a moral issue. This is a country that is trying to assert a certain degree of political will by stopping a rival from getting ahead of it. That's what this is. That is literally what this is. Because of such, China has every right to not allow themselves to be curbed and to push past whatever boundaries the U.S. is trying to throw up. This creates conflict just by definition of the way it's positioned. The U.S., I guess my point is, the U.S. is causing conflict just based on its position. Like, this secondary thing, the U.S. has a military strategy that says we won't allow any country to get to the point of the Soviet Union strength. meaning no new rivalries. We won't let anyone become such a threat to us that they're a military rivalry. Now, you can make an argument that the Soviet Union was never really a threat to the U.S. because when they were yelling the missile gap stuff, it was nonsense, and they knew it was nonsense. But that's their position. But because that's their position, that means that they will be at odds perpetually across the globe. We're in a unipolar world, meaning that there are multiple threats under their guise in that sense. This is problematic. That's what I'm saying. China is not going to take Hong Kong being stripped away. China knows that the United States is involved in these affairs with this guy as a conduit between those things. Not just this guy, but also the other representative. There's an advance on this. Many people have been arrested at the protests in Hong Kong because the protests have gotten violent. What started off as peaceful protests, after meeting with that American representative, mind you, have become violent protests. They've torched police stations. They've thrown these fire bombs at cops. For all the talk of, oh, they're beating protesters. They only say that for countries that we don't like. For countries that we like, it's never an issue. You never really hear that from mainstream media for, let's say, the Yellow Vest movement. But for this, it's on everywhere. Meaning, the Yellow Vest movement has been going with just as much intensity for just the amount of time, for longer than this, like months longer, 3 or 4 months longer than this. You never see it on mainstream media. You never see it. The question becomes, who is making the determination to put this with so much intensity and luminosity while dimming down what is taking place in France? I guess my point to you is, in the same way that Indian media was shaping the attitudes and everything else and weren't non-biased actors in the process, I'm telling you, American media is also not. This stuff on Hong Kong has been everywhere, and it has been over the top. And not saying that it's not important to cover. It is. But so is the Yellow Vest movement in France. So is the Yellow Vest movement. And maybe even more so because of the way that started, the intensity of that, and the way that by not covering it in media, it's their way of trying to tamp down on the information about it. Because if people see it, they may be able to join in and assist, whatever they're seeing.
Yeah. We had 2 super chats in that same vein. Tune at 20. He says, there is media coverage for Hong Kong, 0 for Yellow Vest.
Yeah.
Then he also